Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we have around the round table today Penna Dexter as well as Lathan Watts. And Lathan serves as the Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty. And we are going to obviously talk about the presidential debate last night. The last presidential debate, probably for both of them. Last time that Donald Trump will ever be in a presidential debate, at least I would think. And the last time, most likely, Joe Biden will be. So that's kind of intriguing in that regard. We have a lot more information of what has come out from those stories from the New York Post, and we will follow that. We'll also get into some of these issues of religious liberty and many other topics. But first of all, I thought I'd go around the round table and say I've seen some great pictures. One of those, Penna, was you in front of the Concern Women for America bus with some of our great friends at Concern Women for America.
I went yesterday. They stopped in a few places around DFW, and this one was at Calvary Chapel in Plano. I missed the big crowd. They said they had a bigger crowd, and Penny Nance, the president of Concerned Women for America, was there. She spoke. Ann Hedinger, who's the CWA director for Texas, was there, and a lot of folks came to see. It was really a bus that was touting the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, and it had a huge picture of her, and it was pink, totally pink, big bus. And it was just a lot of fun, sort of to gin up enthusiasm. And, I think it does gin up enthusiasm because it's pretty much a done deal. It's going to happen on Monday.
I would think so. And we will talk about that as well. And Lathan, I thought I might mention that some people say, well, where's Kelly? Well, anybody that watched the video last night showed Stuart Shepard interviewing him in front of the First Liberty bus, which was up there in Nashville. He was there, as I understand, speaking to Turning Point and some of the things that were happening there. And as a result, also was seeing his son and a number of other things and was there part of the debate. But again, you've been traveling around with that truck all sorts of places. You were in Sacramento there, and some people recognized you, and I suspect a lot of people came up to Kelly last night.
Yeah, probably so. We've had the truck out, and out and about various places around the country for the last couple of months, and that's part of our First Liberty Live tour on the road. We did pretty much all September in California to really kind of focus on the issues that are going on with religious liberty in California. And we interviewed a lot of great people out there. We were at the worship service with Sean Foyt in front of the Capitol there in Sacramento. And all of that has been now recorded and edited into multiple episodes of what will be a series that you'll see on our website. By the end of this month, there will be a section of the website at firstliberty.org, sort of a little micro site of the First Liberty Live section, and you'll be able to watch all of those episodes right there from the website and go back and see older episodes. I think I don't know if when it first launches if this will be there, but I know eventually all the Legalese with Lathan episodes will be on that section of the website, so you can go back and pick out your favorites, I guess, if you want. So we're excited about that. That'll be coming, believe, by the end of next week.
Very
Is
good.
the bus going anywhere else before the election?
Short answer is I don't know. I don't think so, but things have changed so rapidly, and that's kind of why we did that. And we had sort of a loose plan so that we could just adapt to events as they unfold. So if there is, something that pops up that we feel like is worthy of getting out on the road again, then you never know. It might pop up, kind of like the Oscar Meyer Wienermobile,
Yeah.
when it shows up in town, run out and get your picture made with it, I guess.
Well, if nothing else, if the election goes into overtime and one of those states is where you're counting ballots, I suspect you might head there as well.
You never know.
Yeah,
exactly.
certainly could be the case. Let's go around the round table and get some initial comments about maybe the style of the debate last night. Monday's commentary that I posted was on the Commission on Presidential Debates, which I've always argued have such a staid and stodgy kind of format that doesn't work as well. One of the things that I had recommended is maybe we should just have microphones on for a few minutes and then turn the other one off, or the other idea is simply not have a moderator, or Hugh Hewitt suggested let you each one of them pick their own moderator. But nevertheless, so we tried last night a different style, and that 90-minute debate, the moderator, Kristen Welker, did a pretty good job. And what's your thoughts, Penna, about kind of the style of what was said last night?
The style was it was a real debate. It was still combative, and it was still. But I think the 2-minute time when you couldn't be interrupted was certainly helpful to set the tone and also give everybody. I think it lowered the temperature because each of the candidates got a chance to say a lot in 2 minutes, and so they weren't frustrated the rest of the time. And then sometimes they interrupted each other, but not very much at all. It was they behaved. I think President Trump probably saw. I kind of agree with this assessment I heard Chris Wallace made, was that it was partly the 2 minutes, but it was partly because President Trump he just didn't do well in the polls afterwards. He hurt himself last time, and so he wasn't going to do that. I think he helped himself because he definitely was the stronger of the two in explanations and his command of the facts. And so I thought he helped himself. There were some zingers that helped him too. We'll talk about those down the road.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this format was definitely better than the first one. The use of the mics, on and off, like Penna said, to give each candidate at least a little time to try to lay stuff out, definitely worked better than the first one. I think Chris Wallace's assessment is partially also sort of covering his own rear end, frankly,
just self-serving.
because he was the moderator of the first one and just let it get completely out of hand.
Yeah.
But I do think that the Trump team figured out that they missed an opportunity in the first debate by interrupting so much, that if you give Biden time to say whatever comes into his head, he is likely to create opportunities for you, and that's exactly what happened last night.
I would think so. And again, part of that is, again, the sad reality that 52 million people have already voted. So as much as many of us around the table enjoy being able to vote early, there is a sad commentary in which that more than 50 million people already voted before they even had a chance to see the second debate. And that's an issue.
Yeah. I voted this week, but I do think that if you're undecided and you're still waiting, this was very helpful for. I think it was more helpful for the Trump side, because there's just certain things that undecided voters don't like, and one of them is illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. That I didn't think that was going to come up at all in this election.
Yeah,
it just hadn't been talked about, but it did. And so I thought some of the points that were well made, and right now we've got the border under control, which I think is good, and people don't want to see a change. When then Joe Biden goes and says, "Well, we're going to make 11 million people citizens," which I mean, that's like, y'all come. That's a signal. Keep them coming. And so for the independent voter, which is a small proportion of the electorate this year, but it's important. I think that it was probably Donald Trump helped himself.
I'm going to be looking for those T-shirts. Joe, who built the cages?
Yeah.
Because that is certainly one of those. Let's come back and get into this a little bit, because we have posted some things on some of the highlights about the debate and a number of other things that have surfaced. So we will get into that in some detail, and of course also kind of look at what's happening in some of these statewide races as well. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
U.S. economy is doing better than most economists predicted. Harrison Dunn says that we are witnessing the sharpest economic snapback in U.S. history. This isn't what many pundits and economists predicted. Most assumed that we would still be trying to dig out from the devastation of the pandemic lockdowns. This economic snapback may also explain why the Gallup poll that I mentioned in a previous commentary has 56% of voters believing they were better off today than they were 4 years ago. The lockdowns collapsed the global demand for goods and drove unemployment to high levels. Now markets not only have stabilized but also rebounded quicker than many would imagine. Oil, for example, is up over 100% over the levels from just a few months ago. Oil prices are usually a sound predictor, an indicator of resumption of robust economic activity. Within months, we have moved from economic contraction to economic expansion. Another indicator is copper, which is a basic material used throughout manufacturing. The market collapsed in the spring, but is now trading higher than in the pre-pandemic levels. Employment is probably the best economic metric to illustrate the economic snapback. Pundits and economists predicted we wouldn't see a complete employment recovery for years. Some economists suggested we might be heading for a decades-long depression. That is not what happened. The unemployment rate reached a high point of 14.7% a few months ago. The current unemployment rate is 7.9%. Dunn reports this growth is the highest on record for the United States. Obviously, more economic growth is necessary in order to employ more Americans, but this economic snapback is certainly good news for millions of U.S. citizens who were rightly concerned about our economic future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter and Lathan Watts here today, and we're looking at the debate, and there are so many topics that really over about 3 hours, it'll take time to cover all of these, as well as other issues, because we will want to talk a little bit about Judge Amy Coney Barrett and the confirmation hearings that pretty much are winding down, and a vote that will take place on Monday. But a little bit later, we'll talk about why that was unanimous, 12-0. I guess no Democrats voted, and so we'll get into that topic as well. But the one that I thought might start with really relates to some of the conversation we've had with our friends at First Liberty, the idea of reopening the schools, businesses, and churches. And just as a setup, in Oregon, this has become a big issue. Our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom have said, wait a minute, you are allowing Governor Kate Brown the opportunity for all sorts of small schools to open. But here in Hermiston, the Christian school there is not allowed to open. And there are all sorts of editorials in the Oregonian, which is kind of the paper of record in Portland, about this and all the rest. But some people let it slip that really it was, we just don't want to take the chance that any of the kids might leave the public schools and go to the Christian schools. Lathan, that's the kind of setup you guys at First Liberty would love, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, bureaucrat made the cardinal rule mistake of in
Telling
politics of actually saying what was on her mind. Our friends at ADF, I'm sure, will be
Take
very
advantage
grateful
of that.
Very
Yes.
grateful for that statement and use it to their advantage and hopefully get a court decision that will protect that school and all the private and faith-based schools there in Oregon. We had similar cases in California where almost that exact same scenario was playing out, and we were able to really just with a demand letter to the government officials say, hey, look, if you can't treat religion worse than you treat any other institution in society. So if you were saying these small schools can open, well, that applies to the Christian schools as well. And, kind of just said, yeah, you didn't really mean this, did you? Because if so, you're going to be hearing from us. And they backtracked quickly, and our clients out there were able to open. So congrats to ADF. I don't want to jinx it, but that seems to be heading in the right direction for them in Oregon. And we have some clients in Oregon as well.
I know
Aaron
you.
and Melissa Klein.
Yes.
That we're several years into that litigation, but hopefully nearing the finish line for them. So, towards a victory that will not only protect them, but all people of all faiths who just want to run their businesses according to their faith in the state of Oregon.
Going to have a much better Supreme Court when it finally goes back there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because if the Oregon Court of Appeals didn't get the memo when the Supreme Court sent it back to them with basically, stapling a copy of the masterpiece decision to it and sending it back and go, maybe you want to try this again. If they, are just dig their heels in and go, no, we're pretty sure we got this right the first time, then we'll go back to the Supreme Court, and that would be certainly not. It's not going to happen, before Monday. So after Monday, there'll be a new justice on the court, and we're confident that she's a textualist and understands the intent of the First Amendment, and will be an ardent defender of religious liberty, as all judges should be. And so if we end up back at the Supreme Court, we're cautiously optimistic about our chances there.
Yes. Penna, what about this? Because you have Donald Trump saying, we can't close up our nation. You're not going to have a nation if you do so. And then Joe Biden says, we're headed for a dark winter. So very different views about how to address this issue of the coronavirus.
I thought it showed up right when they walked out, because Joe Biden had his mask on and took it off. It's so symbolic. And then Donald Trump, there was no mask to be seen. So you started that. They talked about reopening, and the vice president couldn't argue as much because the reopenings have been very successful. There haven't been many cases, and the teachers have not caught it like a lot of people thought they would. So that's been one thing. But the other part of this is, of course, Joe Biden will come back and say, well, you aren't providing enough money for us to be ready for these kids to come back, and we need to refigure and do all these things. Well, I think that's another real contrast between the liberals and conservatives, and that is schools are the province of the community and the state they're in. It's not the federal government's job to provide the money to reconfigure the schools. Yes, if they want to have a program and send out money, the schools may use it for that, but that's always the left's answer. We can't do it unless the federal government pays for it. But it is being done across the country. Schools are making things safer, and it's actually the results are looking pretty good.
Yes. One of the things, I'll just hold this up for people who haven't seen it, is the number of cases are going back up again, and you're starting to hear this drumbeat again about closing down the schools and closing down the economy. And if there's one thing we learned from our interview earlier this week with Jay Richards, the lockdowns don't work. Which was really interesting, because he and the two other authors of this went into it thinking, well, what we're probably going to be arguing is that the lockdowns did flatten the curve, but there were all sorts of economic, educational, medical, and other kinds of crises. But if you look at the charts in there, what's so striking is they show you where the lockdown is, then they show you about 2 weeks later, and it just still keeps going up. And so what was a surprise to them is, for all the hoopla about the lockdowns working, they really didn't work, which I thought was kind of striking, because they came with the assumption that maybe they worked, but there were still all sorts of other consequences, which Donald Trump talked about.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast, like Penna said, was pretty stark. I mean, it was hard to miss. You have the president saying, we have learned along this process, and we now know how to live with it. Yeah. And Biden probably thought he was really landing a punch, going, to live with it, we're dying from it. Well,
the death rates are going way down.
Exactly, and that's what. Even though the cases are going up, and that's why all the news media talks about the cases, the number of cases.
Not the deaths.
You don't hear them talking about the
hospitals.
death rate. You don't hear them talking about the hospitalization rate. The 2 week so supposedly let's lock everything down for 2 weeks so the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. We're now 6 months into 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and the numbers show that, just like you said, the lockdown doesn't really do anything to stop the spread. It just delays it.
Yes.
If people are around each other and it's a highly contagious, it's a virus, it's going to spread, and it did. But it turns out that it is not the existential threat that it was thought to be, which was what led to, okay, we got to do some drastic things here. We saw pretty early on the hospitals didn't get overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
The lockdown and shutting everything down actually ended up for people in rural areas where there weren't that many cases. Several hospitals closed because they were forced to only take COVID patients, and they didn't have COVID patients, and they had no patients,
Yes.
and so many places lost their local hospital because of it. So the hospitals never got overwhelmed. Trump did what he thought was necessary to keep that from happening. He sent the hospital ships. You had Franklin Graham show up in New York with Kent City Hospital,
and he did bring that up. That was good. Yeah.
And because of that, the hospitals didn't get overwhelmed. And over time, the data and just the anecdotal evidence, like, yes, people are getting it, but they're living with it. They're getting over it. Are there some demographics that it is a very real life threat to their life? Yes, absolutely. And that demographic, basically 70 and up, or if you have an underlying health condition, absolutely take measures to protect yourself. But this, the remedy can be worse than the disease if you just lock everything down forever. You can't stop, this in its tracks by just saying, well, we'll just shut down until everybody's healthy. I mean, the effects on mental health, on kids, and not being able to have the socialization that comes from schools and all that other stuff has been documented now. And I think that's what Trump means by we've now learned that we can live with it.
Yes.
And Biden just focuses on
the death. Yeah.
And he's a living example of it because he got through it, and he got through it very quickly. It was just only a few days. I don't know if he just forced himself when he wasn't feeling great when he came back, or if not. But at this point, he's negative. He's out there working harder than most people in the country work, and did a great job on the debate stage. So he's just, you could just look at him, and he's a picture of, we're living with it. It's too bad that we have to deal with the pandemic. We have to deal with it, and we're not going to ruin our country by doing that.
We'll get back into some other issues, but I just thought I'd give you a chance to kind of get a little bit of an overview there. He did say that 99% of those who contract the disease actually recover. He's a good example of that. And he did talk about the mishandling of the H1N1 swine flu, which, interestingly enough, unless you really dig into it, even some people in the Obama administration now admit. But anyway, those were some comments made. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us today. And if you would like to join the conversation, perhaps you had a chance to see the debate and you have your own thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. This hour we have a disproportionate number of people that listen because they are in the state of Texas. So I thought we would talk about something that is perhaps more relevant in Texas, but also Pennsylvania. And that is the comments being made about climate change, which led pretty quickly into the comments about fracking. Now, I'm the old guy around the table, so I remember back in a debate that was done years ago in which Gerald Ford, in the last presidential debate, basically liberated Poland and said they were not under the influence of the Soviet Union, and spent the better part of that next week trying to clarify what he said about that issue and what he meant by that issue. And I'm already getting that same sense in which Joe Biden is saying all sorts of things like he wants to get rid of fossil fuels, and he never said, "I oppose fracking," which provided an opportunity for the fact that if you just go out on Twitter right now and you just type in the word fracking, the first thing that pops up is this whole litany, this montage of places where both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris say they oppose fracking. That is not what you want in a presidential campaign, Penna, because in some respects you spend your time trying to clarify what you meant. And when he already has to address this issue, which we'll talk about later with Hunter Biden, if all you're doing is responding to the questions, it's not exactly getting your message out.
It puts you in a bad position. I think, in Pennsylvania, of course, a swing state up for grabs. Fracking is extremely important to the economy, as it is in Texas. So they had to, both Harris and Biden had to stop saying at some point that they were going to ban fracking, but there's too much tape out there that says they have said that. And he didn't help himself either. I mean, it might have been just okay to say, well, I don't support banning fracking, but he just kept on talking about fossil fuels, and he kept, talking about how we have to subsidize renewable energy, and this is going to take place over time. And none of it would make any oil state feel any better. So it was, I thought, in a sense, a gaffe on his part. It certainly didn't help him.
Yeah, when you invite the other side, to say, "Well, show the tape." I mean, okay,
and we did.
Yeah,
and it showed up on Sean Hannity, and it showed up on Twitter within almost minutes. It was just amazing how fast they can pull these things together.
Yeah, and I think that's also, I've said on here before. I always kind of watch these things from the viewpoint of the staffer. The guy that's behind the scenes, because that's kind of who I was, and I want to go like, surely you've got somebody on staff that is part of their assignment is to watch the Trump rallies.
Yes.
And see what he's saying and what he's doing.
Don't you think? Yes.
Because just like the night before or 2 nights before, he showed video of Biden talking about getting rid of fracking at his rally.
Yes, his rally.
So
you knew it's out there.
Exactly. So, I mean, you got to tell your guy, okay, you can explain it, but explain it, pivot, and move on.
Yes.
Whatever you do, don't say go show the video.
Okay, we are ready to do that.
But
and we could play that if anybody wants, but I think anybody can find it. So that's as simple as it is.
And maybe it is. If it's sort of like if you tell somebody like whatever you do, don't think about pink elephants.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the first thing that comes in your mind is a pink elephant. You wouldn't have thought of it before, but when you tell them not to do it, you've now put it in your mind. Sort of like I'm a golfer, so caddies when they talk to their golfer. If it's a fast putt and he doesn't want them to, he won't go up there and go, "Hey, don't blow this by the hole. Like, don't put too much on this," because now you just put it in his head.
Yeah.
He'll go up and say, "There's plenty of speed on this putt."
Yeah.
That's how you do it. Like, you almost planted it in his head. If that's what happened, if they said, "Hey, stay away from the fracking thing," and you almost give him the idea like he's got to preemptively, defend against it. I think that's also what happened with the stuff about Hunter Biden. I think that was a huge mistake for him to
we'll
bring
get
it up
to that
first.
later for sure.
But in a state like Pennsylvania or Ohio, West Virginia, any of those places where fracking has been a boon to their economy, to put yourself on record like that, saying you're going to get rid of a major economic driver for that state is not a good idea. And you add on top of that the sort of the flip flop that got you, that you say one thing when you're on the debate stage, and here's the video of you saying other things, which goes to your credibility and your integrity and all this other stuff. And in a state where the popular vote is probably going to be very close, a state like Pennsylvania, the fact this happened this late in the election, I think, is good for Biden. If it had happened earlier on, it could have had more of an impact. If this had happened in the first debate, before more people had already voted. But if there are people out there in Pennsylvania, who were sort of on the fence, and maybe they're not on the fence ideologically, but it's just a matter of they don't really like either one of these candidates, and they're trying to decide, am I going to vote at all, or am I, that could be enough to turn somebody from, okay, I'm not going to vote for either one of them, to, okay, I don't really like either one of them, but this will cost me my job.
Yes.
And so I cannot let this guy win.
That gets you really involved very quickly.
Yeah. And if it doesn't take many of those in a race that is close,
for sure,
as close as Pennsylvania was last time and probably will be this time, it doesn't take many of those to make the difference in the popular vote. And, you win the popular vote, you win the state.
Well, and the other part of that is, I still have trouble believing it, but if you look at these maps, they still have Texas as, a little bit of a battleground state. I don't think now in Texas it's going to be a battleground state. And if I can maybe make one comment, yesterday we talked about critical race theory with Doug Groteis. And Kristen Welker at one point said, people of color are more likely to live near chemical plants and oil refineries. Talk about trying to inject race into a conversation about climate change. Actually, she minded her manners pretty good, but that one was just a reach that I thought was really just kind of inappropriate.
It was interesting how Trump answered, talking about how people, they're living there because they're working probably at the plant. They're probably making a pretty good paycheck there.
Yes.
So, they're doing it because they want to make a paycheck.
Yes.
Because that's how capitalism works.
And I will not sacrifice tens of millions of jobs, thousands and thousands of companies because of the Paris Climate Accord. And there's a good difference, because it's very obvious that Joe Biden wants to get back into the Paris Climate Accord. And Joe Biden is really going to probably do that, if for no other reason than because Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, even Kamala Harris is going to make him do it, even if he doesn't want to do it. And it's very obvious that Donald Trump pulled out and not going back anytime soon.
I thought on issue after issue, Joe Biden kept trying to come back and say, I'm the one on that stage of Democrats who doesn't support this far left thing. Like, for instance, the public option, which is socialized medicine.
Right.
It'll probably be at first maybe a public option, and there'll be other choices. But the whole idea of Obamacare was to get to that and get to single payer. And, they're a little slower in doing that than they had planned. But Joe Biden will be the answer to that. Many things, though. Is that believable to you guys when he says, I was the one on the stage who opposed everybody else that were saying, we need to do whatever, Medicare for all. I stood against it.
Yeah.
So,
that's actually one of the things in this debate that I thought was similar to the first debate, in that he made that point. He distanced himself from Bernie Sanders on that. He distanced himself from AOC and the sort of the...
And his own vice presidential nominee.
Yeah.
Yes. And, later he said... and I think it was on the immigration issue. He was like, well, I'll get it done this time because I'll be president, not vice president. That's even a veiled jab at Obama.
Don't you know?
He's saying things like that. And if this is an election that's really about whose base is fired up and whose base is going to show up, well, he just distanced himself from his base. In every time he does that, every time he says, I'm not Bernie Sanders, I'm not this, well, that's where the energy in your party is.
That's right.
And so I don't know if it will be, a huge thing, because I actually think their base has nothing to do with Biden. It has absolutely everything to do with, they just hate Trump.
Yeah.
But by doing that, you're giving reasons to the people who you really need to be excited to come vote for you to not be that fired up about you. Like, hey, you weren't my first choice. Bernie was my first choice, and you just dumped all over him. And so why should I come vote for you now? I mean, it doesn't, again, in a race where the popular vote may be very, very close, it doesn't take many of those things like that sort of throw a little bit of a wet blanket on your own voters. It doesn't take many of those staying home to cost you, a close state.
Yes, if you do not have enthusiasm, and there were some people, for example, not very enthusiastic about Mitt Romney, for example, maybe not all that enthusiastic even about John McCain and some of those, that can hurt you when you are talking about this, because politics ultimately is about numbers, but until you vote, it's all about intensity. Let's come back. I've got some other points that we might want to make, and we will do so right after these important messages.
This election, we've heard discussions of some radical far-left ideas on the campaign trail, but it was a real shock last week to hear a presidential candidate voice support for a right to gender transitions for 8-year-olds. At the ABC Town Hall in Philadelphia, the mother of a third grader who identifies as transgender asked candidate Joe Biden how he, if elected president, would protect the rights of people who claim a different gender under U.S. law. Vice President Biden answered, "I will flat out just change the law. Eliminate those executive orders, number one." Then he went on to describe the scenario where, quote, an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I want to be transgender. Of the life-altering decision for a child to begin a gender transition, Mr. Biden said to this mother, "There is no reason to suggest that there be any right denied your daughter. Parents, doctors, and good government are God-given protectors to help children follow the best, most healthy paths in life. For no child does that path lead toward offering a gender change." But Joe Biden implied that children have the right to pursue gender transition, and to deny this is discrimination. Mind you, we don't have any federal laws that ban gender transition procedures for minors, but some states do, and others are working on passing such legislation. This is exactly the right and wise thing to do for several reasons. First, studies have shown that most children with gender confusion outgrow it by puberty. To step in with drugs that block puberty is not only unwise but medically harmful. The pressure escalates then for more serious interventions. The next step in the transition process is to administer cross-sex hormones. And the third, radical but increasingly common step is gender reassignment surgery. To set a child on this path is wrong. The American College of Pediatricians calls it child abuse. It's now a campaign issue. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and Andrew McCarthy's been on the program with us before, reminded me of something in his piece today. And he said he remembered back when Senator Amy Klobuchar was doing an interview with Fox News' Brett Baier. And she announced that she was actually in favor of the Green New Deal. Then Brett Baier took her through all the different elements: full transition off of fossil fuels, net zero greenhouse emissions, paying people who don't work, refurbishing every building. And on every point, she disagreed with that. And I think it gets back to something, Penna, that Lathan just said a minute ago. Your base wants you to say, I believe in Medicare for all. Your base wants you to say, I believe in the Green New Deal. Your base wants to endorse almost all of those slogans. But once you get into the details about banning fracking, either you're for it or against it. And it just reminded me that sometimes it's real easy to say, I believe in the slogan. But as soon as you talk about what the slogan means, Joe Biden says, well, I really don't agree with that at all.
Well, there's a lot of minds that come together to try to make slogans. Like, you remember the term outcome-based education? It sounded so great, but it was really indoctrination. Medicare for all sounds great, but what it does, as you said, is destroy your Medicare. And even Donald Trump said it. He said when he talks about a public option, he's talking about destroying your Medicare and destroying your Social Security. And Biden was like bristling at that, but it's true.
It's true.
And what will happen is the people who have employer-provided health care, when we have full Medicare for all, which I think it's under Biden, it will come in steps, everybody will lose their employer-provided health care too. It will be all one system. And, they try as hard as they can not to admit that and talk about it. And that's where we come in. We ought to be educating people on what is Medicare for all, what is the Green New Deal. And, Trump tried to do it, like talking about retrofitting buildings. I mean, that is huge. When you think about the expense of that, and to let Joe Biden get away with saying, well, it's going to be an employment generator. It's going to provide, well, who's going to pay these people that are going to be employed? It's going to be your tax dollars. It's not going to be private industry. You're going to destroy that.
And you got some people like 50 Cent, too, saying, didn't think I'd be quoting a rapper, saying, I don't want 20 cent. In other words, I don't want the 62% tax rate. And you've got more and more people. I've got a piece here about Ice Cube and some of these others. Who thought that these rappers would come out in front of Donald Trump? But I think they're all starting to realize that everything is supposed to be free, Lathan, but somebody has to pay for free.
That may be, that may be my favorite quote of the entire campaign cycle. It's 50 Cent saying, well, I'm voting for Trump because I don't want to be 20 cents. I could not, at my best, could not have written a line any better than that.
That is vintage Lathan Watts. Yes, it's a great line.
And it's rooted in fact. He said, I looked at Biden's tax plan, and 62%, if I'm giving up 62% of what I have, then I go from being 50 cent to 20 cent. I mean, you can't explain it any better than that.
It's so good.
That so far
one of the best
definitely
lines.
my favorite line of the campaign, and wasn't even from either one of the candidates. And we'll see. I mean, when people who have a huge following like he does says something like that is sort of against the grain, so to speak, for most people in entertainment industry and even in the black community, we'll see. I mean, if people pay attention to 50 Cent who don't probably pay attention to President Trump or Joe Biden or the news or whatever, and it'll be interesting to see if that has any sort of effect. If people saw that and like, wait, he's what?
What?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And then if they actually go do the homework and go, well, okay, yeah. I guess if he's got to pay 60% of everything he's got, but I think Trump did a pretty good job talking about that, like the retrofitting. But I think I would give him probably maybe a C+ or B- on how he handled that answer, because he went straight to the detail and didn't really explain where he was getting it from. Like, he just started talking about we're going to go from all these buildings that have these big beautiful windows to these tiny little windows, and he didn't start from this is a part of the Green New Deal that Joe Biden wants to implement, and part of the Green New Deal is a complete retrofit of every building in America. This is where the number $100 trillion comes from, because if you implement this over time, that's what it would cost to do this. Think of how many buildings there are in America, and so I think he could have done a little bit better if he had clarified it a little more. Because if you just come out and start talking about big windows versus tiny windows, people can look at you and go, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah, I had a picture in my mind of former Soviet Union country buildings, pictures that you see. And my husband was in Russia, and he said, there's no windows in the buildings.
Yeah.
They're just ugly. Everything is stark and ugly. And that was the picture that it painted for me, so I liked it. But you're right. It should have been explained.
For the general public who may have been tuning in, you say $100 trillion, and that gives Biden the opportunity to go, I don't know where he's getting these numbers from. Where if you started from look, the analysis of the Green New Deal says if you implement this over the next 10 to 15 years, it could cost as much as $100 trillion to do what you're talking about.
Sure.
That would have, I think, drove the point home a little better. But
I think the windows thing still works, and if he uses this in the rallies, I've had some people say, "Yeah, we'll have buildings with no windows," and just the fact is that it was kind of a visual image of what it looks like, and I think Penna's
with a
right.
good explanation behind it, it really works.
Do the foundation, then talk about the windows.
Yeah.
I mean, even show a picture of a building with very few windows, while you're talking about it, and then have the word Green New Deal. That's a campaign ad that works, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can do something like, nobody visited the Soviet Union to study architecture. You could just do that.
Perfect.
Right?
There you go.
And you show the old pictures or whatever. People go to Europe to study architecture, right? And you show the cathedrals and you show all these beautiful buildings. And nobody went to the Soviet Union to study architecture because this is what you get. Yeah. Just giant slabs of concrete. Nobody wants that here. That there's definitely a way to do it, but I think you'll probably the biggest impact of the debate last night was the things that Biden opened himself up to that will be capitalized on in these next 10 to 12 days via TV ads put out by the Trump campaign, by the RNC, by the NRSC, where they will take those clips and then explain it, in a 30-second, 1-minute ad and run it in those states.
Yeah.
If that debate if it moves the needle at all, it'll be because of that.
I would think so. And the point that I was making a minute ago, just to give some credibility to Andrew McCarthy, he says, Amy Klobuchar is a very smart person, and if somebody that smart didn't realize all the details, I hate to say this, but we aren't so sure about the mental acuity of Joe Biden. Does he, even when he says some of these things, know what the implications are? And this is where, again, not only Donald Trump, but Mike Pence and all sorts of other individuals can say, this is what this means to a person that maybe has never thought about it before. And that's going to be what's going to happen over the next week, I would think.
When he would turn from trying to answer a question directly to the audience, this is how this is going to affect your family. It was obviously rehearsed during the 4 days when he was locked down in his home. And he doesn't pull it off very well. Yeah. He just doesn't pull it off well.
Not this time. I think he did effectively in the first debate, but this time Trump was ready for him, and when he did that,
just typical politician.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that line was a good one.
It was, and it was kind of reminiscent of like a "there you go again" from Reagan Mondale or Reagan Carter, in that probably the biggest success that Trump had last night was, even though he's the incumbent, casting himself as, I'm still the outsider. I'm still the guy who's not the politician. I'm still the guy fighting against all of these people, just like this guy who has never had a real job. He has been doing this for almost 50 years, and I think he did very well to continuing to hammer that home, saying, well, why haven't you done it then? Yeah. You talk about this. Well, why didn't you do it when you were vice president? Why didn't you do it the other 40 years you were in government, Joe? He just kept on and kept on and kept on, which was, I think he performed much better this time.
I would think so. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will certainly do so right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our weekend edition. Boy, do we have a lot to cover. Of course, last night we had a presidential debate, so we'll talk about the nature of that debate and how that was actually conducted and some of the issues that were covered. We're also going to talk about some things that weren't covered. One of the articles we posted is on foreign policy, and hardly any of that came up, but a very good piece that you can read there. You might have certainly assumed that we're going to talk about Judge Amy Coney Barrett, soon to be Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and so we have some information about that on the website as well, why she will be confirmed and what that might mean in the future. We also have some great information as well about Hunter Biden, and I guess we'll have to start talking about Tony Bobulinski now, because that surfaced yesterday in one of our articles on the media's shameful Hunter Biden abdication, and maybe illustrating again why you need to turn to some trusted sources for news, because a lot of it has been simply ignored. So we have lots to cover, and in 2 hours we'll do our best. Penna Dexter with me, Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs, and let me go around the round table. Penna, first of all, what's your thought about that? Last night we had a moderator, Kristen Welker, who did very well, I think. There are some places where I would disagree and maybe could have been a little more on the fair side, but at least we didn't have the rancor of the first debate, did we?
Well, she handled just the logistics of it well, and they had it set up so that everybody got to speak at the beginning of each topic for 2 minutes uninterrupted. So I think that helped. And I think she was ready to pivot when she had to, and the candidates gave her openings to do so. So, yes, overall, I thought it was just easier to watch. And I was pleased with President Trump's demeanor last night. I thought he did a great job in that regard. And Joe Biden didn't really he didn't flail around with his memory too much. I know that he was prepared and had been preparing all week, but in a sense, I think there was just a lot of information out there. And you know, we can talk about, and we have been, of course, in the first hour. We can talk about some of the inconsistencies and the unfair statements that were made. There were many of those, and I think probably the best part of it that President Trump was able to portray himself still as somebody who is fighting the system, something he always wanted to be. That's what he ran on in 2016. And I think he succeeded in doing that because he kept bringing up Biden's 50 years in politics.
Yeah, Lathan, what about that? Because it used to be that when you would have a president who'd been in office for 4 years, they were kind of the insider and the challenger was the outsider. But given the fact that you have somebody else he's debating who has been in politics for 47 years, Donald Trump still was able, I think, effectively to portray himself as the outsider fighting the deep state.
I think so. I think that's probably the biggest win that he had, just overall, was being able to recast himself in that role. And typically in an election, presidential election, where you have a candidate that's up for re-election, that election is, most times, it's a referendum on that guy,
right,
on his first term. And I think what Trump did by continually reminding people that Joe Biden's never had a real job, that he's been in government for almost half a century, and continuing to come back when Biden would say, I'm going to do this, he'd say, well, why haven't you done it yet? You know, you've been doing this for 47 years. You were vice president for 8 years. by doing that, I think he successfully, as Penna said, sort of reminded everybody that, yes, I'm the incumbent, but I'm still the guy who is the outsider in D.C. He's the guy who's had to fight with members of his own party in addition to the other side, and just the system in general, the way it's worked for so long. And maybe the best just crystallization of that was when he was telling Biden, well, why didn't you do it? You were just recently vice president. Why didn't you? And Obama, he said, you're the reason I ran, Joe.
Yes, that was interesting.
I thought that was probably the best punch that he landed the whole night when he said, if you and Obama had done a better job, I might not have even run for president.
Yeah, that was interesting. I thought another big theme there was, of course, just the COVID, which Vice President Biden really wanted to make an issue of. But I think Trump did a good job in sort of pivoting on that with the idea of reopening, the idea of you don't have a country if you aren't open for business. And, in a sense, you didn't do a good job with the last flu epidemic. And Biden is trying to say that we would do better, that I have a plan and you don't have a plan. And I think that fell very flat because the things that he suggests doing are things that Trump already did. There's really nothing new that he suggests that he could handle this epidemic, this pandemic with, that hasn't already been done and isn't being done.
Again, the line that we're headed into a dark winter, but then the response back, like you said, from President Trump was everything he proposed we are doing, and he was kind of late to the game. So sometimes you take a swing at an opponent and the punch doesn't land, and I got the sense on that case it probably didn't. What's your thoughts, Lathan?
Yeah, I think so. I think just overall, aesthetically, the whole thing, everybody was better behaved. The fact that we're not talking about the moderator means she did her job. If the moderator is the story, then the moderator failed.
Yes.
And that was a big part of the story after the first debate. So I think that part was handled better. The format, like Penna mentioned, lent itself better to people being able to at least complete thoughts and not, being tempted to interrupt the entire time. The topics in general, I think, I probably would have chosen different topics because they covered a lot of this in the first debate.
Yeah, we've
like
done
you said,
climate change and things like that before. How about foreign policy?
Yeah, exactly.
They did do health care, which we'll get to in just a minute.
Yeah, but foreign policy, immigration,
which surprisingly did show up, which has surprised me.
Yeah,
go ahead.
but wasn't really an announced topic that we're going to cover.
No,
it came up because Trump brought it up.
Right.
He forced some issues into the debate. That were not likely to have been covered had he not. I think Biden made a huge mistake by mentioning the stuff with his son first, by being the first person to bring it up. Because I don't think that the moderator would have brought it up first.
Isn't that something?
I think Trump probably was going to no matter what. But the fact that Biden brought it up, that opened the door for Trump to walk through, and then the moderator had to do a follow-up. I think that was a big mistake on the part of the vice president.
The one question I have is, because it was discussed fairly well at the debate, now does the media, the mainstream media, have to begin covering it? Can they even get away from continuing acting the way they've been acting?
And again, that's something maybe after we come back from the break, let's talk about that, because one of our articles we posted here is by the editors of National Review, and it's called The Media's Shameful Hunter Biden Abdication. And they're quoting from NPR. Yesterday, I gave very high marks to National Public Radio because of a very good piece they did on the pandemic. But here they're quoting from the managing editor from NPR saying, we don't even want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. We don't want to waste the listeners and readers' times on stories that are just pure distractions. And you're thinking, seriously? Have you not seen all the things that are even confirmed by Tony Bobulinski? And for some of our listeners, they might say, who's he? We'll get back to that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The U.S. economy is doing better than most economists predicted. Harrison Dunn says that we are witnessing the sharpest economic snapback in U.S. history. This isn't what many pundits and economists predicted. Most assumed that we would still be trying to dig out from the devastation of the pandemic lockdowns. This economic snapback may also explain why the Gallup poll that I mentioned in a previous commentary has 56% of voters believing they were better off today than they were 4 years ago. The lockdowns collapsed the global demand for goods and drove unemployment to high levels. Now markets not only have stabilized but also rebounded quicker than many would imagine. Oil, for example, is up over 100% over the levels from just a few months ago. Oil prices are usually a sound predictor, an indicator of resumption of robust economic activity. Within months, we have moved from economic contraction to economic expansion. Another indicator is copper, which is a basic material used throughout manufacturing. The market collapsed in the spring, but is now trading higher than in the pre-pandemic levels. Employment is probably the best economic metric to illustrate the economic snapback. Pundits and economists predicted we wouldn't see a complete employment recovery for years. Some economists suggested we might be heading for a decades-long depression. That is not what happened. The unemployment rate reached a high point of 14.7% a few months ago. The current unemployment rate is 7.9%. Dunn reports this growth is the highest on record for the United States. Obviously, more economic growth is necessary in order to employ more Americans, but this economic snapback is certainly good news for millions of U.S. citizens who were rightly concerned about our economic future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, while we talk about the debate, one of those issues is when or if the whole issue of Hunter Biden would come up. And there was really no way that it could be ignored because there was a press conference by Tony Bobulinski. You got to love that name, don't you? If nothing else, who actually goes through and verifies everything in the story. And Andrew McCarthy put it this way. He says, you know, this is something which the media probably cannot ignore now. But as he says, Joe Biden was really behind the curve on the news because at the debate, he tried to play the Russian disinformation card when that has been set aside pretty clearly because, first of all, the Biden campaign and whether it's Hunter Biden or Joe Biden don't say this is not his laptop and these are not his emails and those kinds of things. And so, nevertheless, Joe Biden tried to say, well, yeah, but we got 50 former national intelligence folks who said that Trump is accusing me that this is really just a Russian plant. Well, then if you go back and read the fine print, those individuals, first of all, are the same people that gave us the Russian collusion, are individuals that are following all sorts of people like John Brennan. But if you actually read it, this is what they said. They said, well, this has the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, but we really don't know the details and we don't have any evidence of Russian involvement. So even using that Russian disinformation card was really kind of a week too late because we now have Tony Bobulinski, which, if people don't know who he is, was one of the partners who identifies that, yes, those are emails. Yes, that's his laptop. Yes, the big guy is Joe Biden.
And he was actually in one meeting when he was in the White House, even though the deal never consummated. They were working on it, and it was going to benefit him. I think, what Joe Biden said when he opened it up was that Rudy Giuliani is being used by Russia. He said that. And I thought, how slanderous. I mean, really, they've been trying to say that, and there's no evidence of that. But that's for some reason, they think that's their quote-unquote Trump card to say that this is Russia that's influencing this president. And, when are they going to disabuse themselves of that notion? It took 3.5 years of investigation to show that there was nothing there.
Yeah, and Trump brought that up. He said, look, they investigated every part of my life, including my taxes. I spent 48 or whatever it was,
$48 million.
$48 million of the taxpayers' money and came up with nothing. And even the moderator, if I remember correctly, sort of not really pushed back, but asked Biden, "Are you saying that Rudy Giuliani is a Russian plant?"
At that point, you just got... And let's bring some other facts to the table. We did mention this the other day. John Ratcliffe, all of us know because he's actually here from the state of Texas and was a member of Congress, but now he's the head of National Intelligence. The director of National Intelligence was something implemented after 9/11 because you got all these different groups. You got NSA, you got CIA, and everything else. So he's at the head. What did he say? This is not Russian disinformation. We did not share this with... Adam Schiff and some of those individuals. And then, of course, now yesterday also pointed out something, which I want to get your comments around the table, that we do believe Russia is trying to have an influence in the election, and so is Iran. But they want to do that so that they can defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden. How does that fit with the idea that for the last almost 4 years, we've been hearing this idea that the Russians were involved in the campaign to elect Donald Trump, when I think if you really just looked at that with any kind of objectivity, you'd say, no, I think Russia would have probably wanted Hillary Clinton, not Donald Trump, and they would want Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, it's they're accusing the other side of what they're actually doing.
Yes.
Congress basically tried to impeach and remove Donald Trump for the type of action that Joe Biden via his son was actually doing. And they went after Trump over a phone call to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, which was basically saying you should look into these, what's going on with Burisma. So they tried to remove him for suggesting that a country investigate corrupt business dealings, when the corrupt business dealings were actually the stuff going on with the Biden folks. The fact that it's coming out now, with just a little over a week left, it will be interesting to see if it has an effect, because it is sort of convoluted. It is sort of complicated. You do have to kind of get down in the weeds to understand
that, and
what's
it's
going
not
on.
easy.
But that's why the press conference with Bob Alinsky, which I just like saying that guy's name.
But will the other people in the press say his name? That's the question you ask, and I just wonder about that.
Yeah, exactly, because maybe because it was brought up in the debate, in recapping the debate, they almost have to mention it, but it's, excuse me, I think they're going to do everything they can to avoid it.
Yes.
And it's just going to be, the Trump and the RNC and everybody else who will probably have to, via TV ads and rallies and speeches and all that, have to keep reminding people about it.
I was glad that it came up. I was glad that everybody had to touch on the issue, including the moderator. But I'm also glad that it wasn't, that Trump didn't go crazy on it, because they needed to discuss the issues.
Right.
They did not need that to take over. If it had been 2 weeks ago, yes, it could have taken a bigger proportion of the debate, and that would have been fine and good strategy. But I think the proportion of the time it took was actually about right.
There is an article that I've posted here, and it's by Ben Weingarten, who is with Claremont. And it says basically that this foreign policy issue was ignored, and we understand that. Matter of fact, even at one point when you have the moderator, Kristen Welker, say, well, let's get into the whole issue of national security. And then it goes and talks about the election. I'm like, oh, please, because what I think is more relevant to the average person in America is of these two individuals, who is going to be tougher on Russia, and most importantly, and I think even more significantly, who's going to be tougher on China? Because it's pretty clear that Joe Biden has done all he can to apologize for China, and starting to look like some of the players for the NBA, if you will, and some of these others that are so tied to China that they can't even be critical. And so in some respects, that was maybe the more relevant point, don't you think?
Yeah. Gary Bauer made the point yesterday that, it's too bad it wasn't about foreign policy, especially the issue of Iran.
Yes.
She did bring up when she said, Kristen Welker said, talking about national security, that Russian and Iranian interference in the election was looking like that was happening. And they always try to interfere in our elections. I mean, that is a fact. That does happen. But, last time when it was studied, it was found that there was no Russian really effect on the election, on the outcome of the election. But But what got to happen was, or what should have happened if you could have had more of a debate on national security, was that Trump could have talked more about, well, okay, I've increased the strength of NATO. I've made it more of a participatory alliance, and people are now contributing more on NATO, and that NATO is really there to stand against Russian aggression. He could have talked more about Ukraine. He did bring in North Korea, which was really good, I thought,
surprising.
because the point that he did make on foreign policy, and he did it on his own strength, was that we haven't had any wars. He did not want to have wars. He doesn't want long wars. He's pulled our troops out in certain places. And, with North Korea, Biden kept on dissing him for having a friendship or discussions with Kim Jong-un, and he made the point: we've got peace. We have not had a war. We haven't had aggression take place, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, haven't seen a lot of missiles flying over Japan right now and things like that. So we'll see. Now, there were some other places where certainly the issues were used to advance Joe Biden. So let's talk about those after the break. Climate change is a good example of that. Black Lives Matter, and of course the whole issue of health care. Because after all, if you want to see a difference. After all, we're going to move from Obamacare to Biden Care. Is that what it's called? I guess we're going to call that Biden Care, and the differences on those issues. So we'll talk about that. But also, if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And before we're all done, we will talk about Judge Amy Coney Barrett and what that might mean, because just this week we began to learn that this 4-4 tie on this case out of Pennsylvania didn't work out so well, because they simply decided not to decide in the Supreme Court. 5-4 might be important, especially if we end up with a election that goes into overtime. So we'll see what kind of impact that Justice Amy Coney Barrett might have. We don't want to count that until it happens, but I think it's going to happen on Monday. So we certainly welcome your phone call, but if you want to find some of these articles that we've posted, there are quite a number today. And if you want to read them, pass them on to your friends, neighbors, coworkers, family members. It is there for you to use. And let's again take a break. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts, Penna Dexter. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us. And let me focus first on healthcare, and then we'll maybe get into the issue of climate change and the Green New Deal. But one of the places where I think the Democratic Party nationally, not only just with the presidential election, but I've seen it in almost all these congressional elections, Penna, is this idea of pre-existing conditions. And again, that is something that Donald Trump talked about last night, but it just seems to be hammered again and again and again. And if you've watched any of these ads, they most of the time the Democratic candidates against a Republican candidate just hammer away at this issue of the Green New Deal. And so last night you have the whole issue of the Affordable Care Act and what that might mean. And Joe Biden trying to say, well, I'm different than Bernie Sanders, which I had trouble taking seriously. But what are your thoughts?
Well, when Obamacare was first sold, it was sold to take care of the problem of people having pre-existing conditions. And when you filled out your insurance, like if you had to get individual insurance, which I was in that position, and when you filled that form out, you had to write down the things that you already had that were pre-existing conditions, and they could actually check on those. And so you couldn't, you needed to tell the truth about that, and sometimes your policy would be more expensive. And so Obamacare was sold partially on the fact that pre-existing conditions would not be a reason for you to be denied health care or to have it be more expensive. And it's been very popular to have that. That's one of the most popular things about Obamacare. The other part that has been popular has been the idea that your 26-year-old or, up to age 26 child could be covered. Mm-hmm. So now that we want to, because Obamacare has been pretty much of a disaster and very expensive, and new plans have to be made if we strike down the individual mandate has been struck down now. It's basically taken away because of the tax plan that President Trump put in. So the Supreme Court now can strike it down. But that won't strike down all of Obamacare. The Republicans don't have a comprehensive plan like the Democrats had in Obamacare. But what President Trump has done, first of all, he said we are going to cover pre-existing conditions. No matter what healthcare plan emerges, it will cover pre-existing positions. We understand that's what the American people want. Other things he's done, he's allowed industries to band together to have health care plans. He's also he's offered short-term health care plans that are cheaper. He's offered plans that are more limited, that don't cover all the mandated things that Obamacare asked for, which made it more expensive. He's done a lot of things through executive order, which actually you're allowed to do under Obamacare because the Health and Human Services Secretary in the law is given power to make certain decisions on this. So to say that, there's no plan, well, in a free market, you don't usually have a big comprehensive program for something. We've just been conditioned that we need that because of Obamacare. Mm-hmm. We don't need a replacement for Obamacare that's another huge comprehensive plan. We need the free market to begin to be able to work again. And that's why we can't really come up with another Obamacare and shouldn't. But to not believe the promise from the president and the members of Congress that talk about this, that pre-existing conditions will be covered, it's really dishonest for them to say that they're going to take away your pre-existing condition coverage because nobody's talking about doing that.
Yes. And we quoted a little bit from Ned Ryan yesterday, and Dr. Merrill Matthews has been on the program. But, Lathan, let me come to you for just a minute, because Joe Biden contended that not a single person with private insurance would lose insurance under what he's now called Biden Care, but they didn't lose their insurance under Obamacare. What world does he live in?
Yeah, that's one of those things. It's demonstrably false, and it's almost incomprehensible to me how you let yourself say something like that in a debate, or how the people that prepped him for the debate. I mean, he spent the better part of a week not campaigning, holed up preparing for this debate. Did at some point they not cover? Now, look, when you talk about Obamacare, don't say that people didn't lose their health insurance because of Obamacare. That was sort of mind-boggling to me. I thought that there was an opportunity there also for the president that he could have seized on that and said, well, if Obamacare was so great, why do we need Biden care? Mm-hmm. You talked about the Amy Coney Barrett hearing. The first day was all about, she's going to get rid of Obamacare, when their own stated plan for the future gets rid of Obamacare and it just institutes government-run, Medicare for all, or whatever you want to call it. So it's a huge contradiction, even from people on the left. I do think that the GOP is committed just sort of political malpractice, pardon the pun, by not having a specific, detailed, even if it's just an outline.
Remember,
of here are the policies.
And replace.
Exactly.
Okay, if you're going to repeal, what are you going to replace it with?
Exactly.
Put up. Come on.
To not have something you can articulate to say, here's what we're going to do.
Yes.
I mean, Trump, he does what Trump does. We're going to have we have a plan that's going to be the biggest and the greatest thing, and you're going to have the best health care. It's going to be cheaper and blah, 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 blah. Okay, how are you going to do that? And it doesn't have to be, Woodrow Wilson, 50-page, here's my 92-point plan for health. But you do need to have something. 2 or 3 specific policy points that you are going to emphasize to address this. And even if it is, you know what, this is something that should be left to the states to cover, because the risk pool in Texas is different than it is in California. It's different than it is in Maine or Oregon. And so even if you start from there and say, look, the federal government should not try to fix this problem with a one-size-fits-all solution crafted in D.C. We should maybe empower the states to do it, maybe block grant some of the funds that we use for this type of issue and free it up so the states can use it however they want to use it in whatever solutions they want to implement. If you're going to talk about pre-existing conditions, then talk about them for what it is. You want to help people who have a condition that makes it harder for them to get affordable health insurance. Okay. But don't call it insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. Insurance is about allocation of risk. If you already clearly have something, the issue of risk is no longer a question. It's like trying to buy homeowners insurance while your house is on fire. Okay? Nobody's going to sell it to you. Okay? Nobody's disputing that that's an issue, but talk about it in the terms as what it is. There are people who have chronic conditions, and some of those chronic conditions can be expensive to treat. So if you want to come up with a program that helps them deal with those conditions, but also will not completely bankrupt the health insurance industry by saying, you've got to cover this at the same rate that you cover everything else. Well, that's not how insurance works. So there's plenty of blame to go around, I guess. It continues to be an issue that polls as very important to voters, and so I think
it's very personal. That's why this one is always connected, because everybody needs health insurance, probably. So that's different than worrying about China.
Care.
Yeah,
and that's what pre-existing conditions really is. Right. It's health care.
Yeah, and
not necessarily insurance.
Right, exactly. And again, it gets back to discuss things for what they are. We're talking about reforms of health insurance.
Right.
We have the best health care in the world.
Yes.
People don't leave America to go get better health care. They might leave America to go find cheaper health care in some completely subsidized, socialized version of health care in Canada or somewhere else that might work for you if you go up there and you do it on a one-off basis, but it's completely unsustainable as a country, as a nationwide policy going forward. But you don't leave this country to get better health care.
Mm-hmm.
You might... we're talking about health insurance reform, and this goes back all the way back to FDR, frankly, when you had salary and wage freezes during World War II. Well, markets are going to find a way to compete, and I can't pay you more. I can only pay this much. Okay, well, how about I pick up the tab for your health insurance? And that's how you can compete for workers when FDR has said you cannot pay people more than this when you have wage freezes. And over time, it became this expectation that somebody else is supposed to pay for my health care. And we look at health insurance different than we look at any other type of insurance.
Sure.
Nobody expects their car insurance to pay for their oil change.
Yeah.
But people look at health insurance like if I walk through a doctor's door, I should just not have to pay a penny for anything.
Yeah. And the employer owns it, or the government owns it. And
they get to choose it.
Yeah.
Too.
And an employer doesn't own my car insurance or my house insurance or anything else, but it owns my medical insurance, or the government does with Medicare and Medicaid. Let's take a break, though, because I think some of you want to get into the other issue, and that is, of course, the issue of climate change. And not only did Joe Biden say, nobody lost their health insurance under Obamacare, he also said, I've never actually opposed fracking. And immediately, all sorts of videos showed up on Twitter showing him and Kamala Harris opposing fracking. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
This election, we've heard discussions of some radical far-left ideas on the campaign trail, but it was a real shock last week to hear a presidential candidate voice support for a right to gender transitions for 8-year-olds. At the ABC Town Hall in Philadelphia, the mother of a third grader who identifies as transgender asked candidate Joe Biden how he, if elected president, would protect the rights of people who claim a different gender under U.S. law. Vice President Biden answered, "I will flat out just change the law. Eliminate those executive orders, number one." Then he went on to describe the scenario where, quote, an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I want to be transgender. Of the life-altering decision for a child to begin a gender transition, Mr. Biden said to this mother, "There is no reason to suggest that there be any right denied your daughter." Parents, doctors, and good government are God-given protectors to help children follow the best, most healthy paths in life. For no child does that path lead toward offering a gender change. But Joe Biden implied that children have the right to pursue gender transition, and to deny this is discrimination. Mind you, we don't have any federal laws that ban gender transition procedures for minors, but some states do, and others are working on passing such legislation. This is exactly the right and wise thing to do for several reasons. First, studies have shown that most children with gender confusion outgrow it by puberty. To step in with drugs that block puberty is not only unwise but medically harmful. The pressure escalates then for more serious interventions. The next step in the transition process is to administer cross-sex hormones. And the third, radical but increasingly common step is gender reassignment surgery. To set a child on this path is wrong. The American College of Pediatricians calls it child abuse. It's now a campaign issue. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Arizona first. KNLB. Michael, I think you want to talk about the Green New Deal. That came up last night, and, of course, the whole issue of climate change. So what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't believe that he actually admitted he was a socialist. I mean, he really did last night. The Green New Deal, Medicaid for all, giving the illegals, 10,000 illegals, citizenship. But I want to get back to the new Green Deal.
Please.
He wants to take buildings, tear them down, put up the buildings that exist will have to have little tiny windows. And he was talking about what's going to happen to it wasn't just buildings. He was also talking about homes.
Oh yeah.
And he wants to turn suburbia into little cities. And people moved out of the big cities to get away from that. Personally, I think he's nuts.
Well, I kind of got that, but that gets into the details a little bit. You know, Andrew McCarthy wrote this piece in which he reminded us of when Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's a pretty bright individual, was on Fox News with Brett Baer, and she said, "Oh yeah, I endorse the Green New Deal." And so Brett Baer, to his credit, says, "Oh, well, let's go through that. Full transition off of fossil fuels. No. Net zero greenhouse emissions. No. Paying people who won't work. No. Refurbishing every building in the United States. No." Finally, she couldn't agree with any of the elements. They weren't at the time talking about smaller windows, but that was what came up last night. I think Donald Trump did a good job of saying, we like these big windows, and now you're going to get small windows. What about that?
Well, you know, the retrofitting building component of the Green New Deal, and Joe Biden tried to talk about that, how these old buildings are spewing out pollution and all of that. And then he talked about how all these new jobs are going to be created through retrofitting these buildings. And I thought you've missed a whole piece, because, I mean, we're learning right now in COVID that if you put restrictions or restraints on business or make it harder for them to make a profit, then you can wipe a business out, or you can make it just less profitable and less successful. And, you know, doing that for your building, if you own a building and you all of a sudden have to retrofit the building to the tune of, you know, a couple $100,000 or whatever, that's going to affect your bottom line. So who's going to pay for this? Well, he says it's going to create jobs, but to me, it seems like it's going to put businesses out of business, which will mean less jobs. And then the same thing with your home. Okay, we're going to, bit by bit, neighborhood by neighborhood, we're going to retrofit homes and require them to be much more energy efficient. Well, who's going to pay for that again? And if it's the government paying for it, he's taking the money from somewhere, the taxpayer. If it's the person that has to pay by requirement from the government to retrofit their own home, I mean, most people live paycheck to paycheck. How are they going to do that? So there's just a missing piece, this promise of new jobs and this promise of all that we're going to do for the environment. There's a missing piece. How do you pay for it?
No such thing as a free lunch, Lathan.
There never is. I thought, you know, Trump should have asked him, so if we like our windows, do we get to keep our windows?
Yeah.
What a great line.
Because you told us about that with our doctors, and it didn't work out.
I like my windows.
Yeah. And he kind of did, you know,
yes, that's exactly
by saying that,
yeah.
you know, well, we got, you look around, you got buildings with these great, big, beautiful windows, and he's going to make them tiny little windows. I think he should have, I think he went right to a detail where he should have started from where it comes from, sort of explaining.
Would make you do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's something that.
But I see a campaign ad coming up here, don't you?
I hope.
Here's the buildings with all these beautiful buildings, and then here's the Soviet Union, or here's Venezuela, or here's a prison which has small windows, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we talked about, I think in the first hour, like nobody traveled to the Soviet Union to study architecture, right? you go to Europe to study, beautiful architecture. So you need to get just giant concrete boxes. That's basically what it is. So, yeah, I think had the president did a much better job in this debate than he did in the first one. I think everybody behaved better. He did a much better job of providing opportunities for Biden to speak, which then provided him the opportunity to contrast between the two. And I think that the contrast was, you couldn't miss it on every issue. They just could not be further apart. And so I think if the debate moves the needle at all, in one way it might be similar to the first one, in that the first one I think probably turned off some people who might still have been trying to make up their mind and just said, I'm not putting up with either one of these guys. Mm-hmm. Which, if that's the case, then it turns the election really into a battle of whose base is more motivated to come out and vote.
Right.
And by Biden several times saying things like, well, I won this primary because I was different from all those guys. Well, he's actually, taking shots at some of the more popular people in his party, like Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
He even took a veiled shot at President Obama.
That was an interesting one. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think it was on the immigration issue. He said, well, because Trump I think did a very good job this time of constantly, every time he said he was going to do something, reminding him, well, Joe, you've been doing this for 47 years. Why haven't you got it done yet? Why didn't you fix it? When you were, you had 8 years in the vice presidency. And one of his answers was, well, I'll do it this time because I'll be president, not vice president. And I don't know any other way to take that than a shot at your old boss.
I'd say
That's
so.
not wise if you're trying to motivate the Democrat Party to turn out and do the work and show up and bring people to the polls. That doesn't help your case. The climate change, we're going to completely transition away from fossil fuels, the stuff on fracking. I thought that was one of the things that Trump did well when he did pin him down and he did say, yes, we're going to transition away from oil and gas. And Trump actually specifically said, did you hear that, Pennsylvania? I thought that was one of his better moments because he knows that's a state that's a close race.
Oh, boy.
That where oil and gas is a big part of their economy, fracking specifically. And that could be enough. We just have a few days left. I don't know how many people are still on the fence, but maybe if there are people on the fence that because they just don't really like either one of them, were trying to make up their mind, who might not have voted at all, who just said, I don't really like either of them, so I'm sitting this one out. But if you're a guy who works in the fracking industry and you hear that and you go, oh, well, now I got to go vote for the other guy because this will cost me my job.
Yes. That'll work. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, let's get into the issue of Black Lives Matter and racism and those kinds of things for a couple of reasons. First of all, one of the articles we've posted is by Larry Elder, which he writes kind of an open letter to Ice Cube, who was sort of asking the question, why is it that we in the African-American community keep supporting the Democrats and they haven't done very much for us? And, of course, we yesterday talked about 50 Cent, I guess how he said it, 50 Cent, who said, under this tax plan, I'm going to be 20 cent, which I think is a great line. But also, it gets back to why didn't you do this? Because Trump said, I got criminal justice reform done. I got prison reform done. I got opportunity zones done. We took care of black colleges and university colleges and all of that. And at the other time, then, of course, he was really pressed at a couple of times there by Kristen Welker about why you were so critical of Black Lives Matter. So I want to get into that for sure. But before we finish the next hour, also want to get some thoughts about Judge Amy Coney Barrett, because I think she might be Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And if indeed she is sitting in a chair this time next week in the Supreme Court, that changes some things. And if we do have a close election, what might that mean as well? So we have a lot more to cover. And if you find yourself saying, well, I want to join that conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you say, well, I'd like to see some of the articles you're quoting from, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us. And one of the other kind of attacks on President Donald Trump is on the issue of race. And, of course, we've had racial tension and the rest. In the first debate, a pointed question about why did you say that we have to get rid of critical race theory and white privilege and other things from being taught in the federal government. This time it came up when, again, the moderator, Kristen Welker, said, well, why have you been so critical about Black Lives Matter? And now he tried to explain that, well, the first time he saw Black Lives Matter, they were chanting pigs in a blanket, talking about police, and pigs in a blanket fry them like bacon, and he was saying that was a horrible thing. But what about this? Because the issue of race is being used, as it is so often, by a Democratic candidate against a Republican one, and it seems to have landed better against President Donald Trump. So what about this particular interchange that took place in the debate last night?
I think it landed against Donald Trump because Joe Biden made the issue race from the very beginning. And, you know, he says, you've heard him say that he ran because of statements that Donald Trump made after Charlottesville. But, and I'm surprised they didn't ask last night if Trump was a white supremacist. They didn't ask that question, amazingly enough.
They usually do, though.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But Trump was able to list some accomplishments, and he did a very good job of doing that. And, you know, one accomplishment, certainly the economy and unemployment for all kinds of different folks that have been having trouble in the economy, including blacks, including Hispanics, including a lot of different groups. Of course, unemployment got a lot better. The situation improved, then COVID came, and it's there have been some bumpy roads there. But also, he was able to list some other things. For instance, criminal justice reform, the First Step program, he got that done, and he was able to make the point that Joe Biden didn't get it done. As a matter of fact, the 1994 prison bill ended up incarcerating many, many low-level drug offenders and affecting black families. And he made the point that those families are still suffering in a sense from that. So I thought he landed a lot of good arguments there. And then his help for opportunity zones in cities, his the colleges, the historically black colleges, the aid for that. And he said, well, I didn't want to have it to be renewed every year. I wanted something bigger. And so, you know, there was a lot there. And then they even had an argument about minimum wage. And he helped, you know, he tried to make the point that minimum wage actually doesn't help the black community because it causes employers to fire people.
I might just mention we have an article here I'm going to quote from in just a minute, Ice Cube, but I was puzzled when I heard Joe Biden, Lathan, say, Abraham Lincoln over here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history. And, of course, Donald Trump said, what's this Abraham Lincoln stuff? And he said, well, you compared yourself to Abraham Lincoln. I said, no, that's not even what I said. But obviously, it was one of those head-scratching moments in the midst of the debate, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think that charge against Trump, you're right. It's leveled all the time, every election cycle.
Yeah, you expect it.
The Democrats have used it against Republicans forever. And as much as I think Trump probably more than any other Republican does respond and hit back and defend himself. I think, look, politicians keep using things because they work.
Right.
Okay. People will say, if you poll them, how much they hate negative ads. Okay. But negative ads work. That's why politicians use them.
Yeah.
That charge gets used over and over and over again because it has worked for so long. And I think more than really anybody in a long time, Trump does push back against it. I think that if it sticks with him at all, it's really just he's not a great communicator. Okay, I don't think anybody thought that he was. I don't think anybody voted for him because they wanted him to be the speech maker in chief or America's orator. They voted for him because he was not like anybody else that had ever run for president, and they wanted somebody to go in and maybe the guy who is rough around the edges and throws some sharp elbows here and there will get something done. And that's what I think his base for sure loves about him. And so he's right to bring up all of the things that he's done. But just from a politician standpoint, and somebody that is in the political arena, that's not his strong suit. Is taking a charge like that and in a very sort of rhetorically smooth way, dismissing it or addressing it and making it so obvious that it's false. But like I said, that's not really what people wanted out of this president. If they wanted a very eloquent, smooth, distinguished, good speech maker, normal hair kind of candidate, Mitt Romney would have been the Republican candidate. I mean, he's basically the GOP Ken doll, but nobody voted for him. The people on the right were tired of the typical GOP politician, and along comes this Trump guy, and I think a lot of people were like, well, probably couldn't get any worse. Let's give this guy a shot and see what happens. Here we are.
Well, he's a guy that does the right things, and then when he's asked the question, he has an answer, but it's not crafted in the best way. So, we're asking for all of the above and both, and we're not getting it.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the issue of race? Because you say they use it because it works. Okay, there is a reason that Joe Biden really wants to hammer it this time, because after all, Donald Trump got only 8% of the African-American vote. That's the best estimate he got, which if you go back and recognize that Mitt Romney and John McCain were running against an African-American candidate, that 8% is really, really low. Almost everybody that's being polled says that it's going to be a lot higher than 8% this time. It gets into the piece that we've posted here by rapper. Again, I've now quoted 2 rappers in 2 days here. First at 50 cents, now Ice Cube, who put out a piece on social media wondering what blacks are getting in return for their unquestioned loyalty to the Democratic Party. Now, he isn't the only one asking that. As a matter of fact, the one we posted here is a letter by Larry Elder to Ice Cube to read into all the other issues facing the African-American community. And if you're an African-American, I would encourage you to read that, because I thought it was a very good piece, both by Ice Cube and by Larry Elder, both of whom, of course, African-American. But Donald Trump does not win Pennsylvania if, again, the same percentage of African Americans vote for Donald Trump that voted for him 4 years ago, because the African American vote in Pennsylvania pretty much elected Donald Trump. So what about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. He won the election with only 8% of the black vote. So if he gets that to 10, 12%, that could be enough in a close race in many states.
Yep.
Because you look at where the black vote is located in those states.
Michigan and Pennsylvania, and you win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We need to take a break, but I will come back and get into more detail, because it's, again, maybe the reason why that race issue keeps popping up, because of the concern about who could win. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The U.S. economy is doing better than most economists predicted. Harrison Dunn says that we are witnessing the sharpest economic snapback in U.S. history. This isn't what many pundits and economists predicted. Most assumed that we would still be trying to dig out from the devastation of the pandemic lockdowns. This economic snapback may also explain why the Gallup poll that I mentioned in a previous commentary has 56% of voters believing they were better off today than they were 4 years ago. The lockdowns collapsed the global demand for goods and drove unemployment to high levels. Now markets not only have stabilized but also rebounded quicker than many would imagine. Oil, for example, is up over 100% over the levels from just a few months ago. Oil prices are usually a sound predictor, an indicator of resumption of robust economic activity. Within months, we have moved from economic contraction to economic expansion. Another indicator is copper, which is a basic material used throughout manufacturing. The market collapsed in the spring, but is now trading higher than in the pre-pandemic levels. Employment is probably the best economic metric to illustrate the economic snapback. Pundits and economists predicted we wouldn't see a complete employment recovery for years. Some economists suggested we might be heading for a decades-long depression. That is not what happened. The unemployment rate reached a high point of 14.7% a few months ago. The current unemployment rate is 7.9%. Dunn reports this growth is the highest on record for the United States. Obviously, more economic growth is necessary in order to employ more Americans, but this economic snapback is certainly good news for millions of U.S. citizens who were rightly concerned about our economic future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that some of the articles we've posted here today, one on the presidential debate differences, highlights from the second Biden-Trump debate. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to find some of those quotes, maybe to use or to put on a letter to the editor or post on Facebook, those are all right there. And these 8 highlights talk about reopening the schools, and that gets into COVID-19, one on the vaccine, and as well on climate change and fracking, which we've just talked about a minute ago, healthcare, which we've also talked about as well. Who's tougher than on Russia, which I think I'll pass just for the moment, but then it gets into the issue of Black Lives Matter, racism, and even minimum wage. And that is an issue that keeps coming up. And Penna, one of the things that Lathan was saying is, if you hear people using this in a campaign, they use it because it works. Just like I say, if you see a commercial on television again and again and again, it's not on there because it's not working. It's on there because it is working. And so in some respects, there is a fear on the part of some of these Democratic candidates that if we can't raise and ratchet this race issue up, we could lose some of these elections. And that certainly seems to be the case with the Biden campaign towards the Trump campaign, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, on Black Lives Matter, I think President Trump missed the opportunity to talk maybe just say a couple things about what Black Lives Matter really is, because
missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that the destruction and violence is in great part being caused by Black Lives Matter activists. So that would have been probably something he could have said. And I think it's huge that these rappers are talking about this because they're famous and they appeal to young people. And the one that we put up, the article that we put up by Larry Elder, Ice Cube Gets It, what he did, I think, is really smart, because he took some famous African Americans like Barack Obama, Tupac Shakur, and other experts like Heather McDonald, who studied the actual crime against black people from police officers and given the correct statistics about it. And so these are all, talk about quotable. They're quotable. And one thing that keeps coming up again and again, of course, is the family. Two parents in the family is so important to break the cycle of violence and government dependence. So, and one other area, I think we talk about critical race theory, and Donald Trump did one other thing. He actually banned throughout the federal government these trainings for government employees that employ critical race theory, which actually forces people to then look at themselves and say, well, where's my racism? How am I racist? And race just is behind every bad thing, apparently. Your racist sensibilities are. And, he's done that in the federal government. And, this is something that it's nationwide in companies. And it's basically the same thing, affirmative action. It's not a good policy, and it's so divisive to our country. And we've had, states like California back in several years, 25, 30 years ago, they banned affirmative action. Now they're trying to bring it back through a referendum, and it's not going well because people don't want this. They don't want race to be the defining characteristic that you have to be evaluated. And for some reason, we thought that was going away. It's all coming back, and President Trump has always been good at standing against that type of thing, and he's doing it now in his actions.
Yes. Well, again, you've got intersectionality, you've got white fragility, you've got right preference, and all sorts of other things, right privilege, I guess I should say. And each one of those are trying to push forward an agenda, which is similar to the Black Lives Matter movement. And we've tried so many times in this program to make a distinction between Black Lives Matter, which do, and the movement, which is become so controversial. Have you noticed they've now pulled all sorts of very controversial aspects off of their website? So that should tell you a lot as well. And the sad reality is there have been some opportunities, not that you're expecting the president to be able to understand the philosophical movement of some of these organizations, but when Chris Wallace last time said, well, why are you against basically a non-discriminational type of program? Well, that's not what we are talking about here. And of course, if individuals want to study it, they can go out and buy the book White Fragility, or they can go read about various critical race theory, or they can listen to the program yesterday we did with Doug Groteis. But our tax dollars don't need to be used in that regard. And so he should have picked up that opportunity. But nevertheless, this issue of race is going to be with us. We thought we were kind of getting over that, but it's gotten worse. And Lathan, if nothing else, we're going to see this probably quite a bit over this next week. I mean, there's going to be a hammering of the pre-existing conditions and a hammering on race. And some people that are listening right now may not even want to turn on their television sets next week. What do you think?
Yeah, at this point, like I said, I think it's a base election.
Yes.
It's about
get your base out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so those are things that motivate the left. And so that's what Biden's probably going to hammer on if he gets out of his house in the next week to 10 days. And I think he has to, because I think the performance in the debate last night opened so many doors with some of the things that he said for, Trump is going to be out there every day from now until Election Day, probably doing 2, 3, 4 rallies a day, and he is going to hammer and hammer away at the things that Biden said in that debate. And so I think Biden has to get out and campaign because he does not, and somebody on his team is smart enough to know you cannot let what happened last night be the last word from you between now and Election Day. You've got a lot of explaining to do to people in Pennsylvania about fracking, to people in Texas about the oil industry, to people in North Carolina and Georgia and Ohio and Michigan, all of these swing states that, that you're going to completely transfer away from the fossil fuels industry. You know what they make in Michigan, Joe? They make cars in Michigan. You know what cars run on, Joe? Gasoline.
At least for the moment.
And
for now, they do.
So
Yes.
that's why, you're right. I mean, that's why he's going to go out and hammer on these things. I think he's going to have to get out there and campaign because he created too many opportunities last night for the TV ads to be run, for the stump speeches to be given by Trump in the final sort of closing argument to the country. And so I think we're going to see that. And then there might be maybe a little brief break in that, hopefully Monday when Judge Barrett becomes Justice Barrett. And that will probably be a topic of conversation maybe for one news cycle for the day when she's sworn in. And I think it's important that she does get confirmed and sworn in because, like we've said on here before, this is likely going to be a very tight election. And if it ends up being a contested election like you had in 2000 with multiple lawsuits moving through the country challenging this part of the election or that part of the election, you really don't want to have an 8-member court because occasionally we do. Like when Justice Scalia passed away, there was a little bit of time there where we had an 8-member court and they split 4-4 on a couple of things. And when the court splits 4-4,
which they did the other day on the Pennsylvania case. Yeah.
What the effect of that is the lower court ruling stands.
Yes.
And so if you had,
but you can't do that with an election if you have to do something like Gore versus Bush.
Yeah, that's my point. Is that if you had a scenario where, let's say, you had multiple lawsuits filed, maybe one in Florida, one in Pennsylvania. Those are two different circuits at the Circuit Court of Appeals level. Well, what happens if those make it to the Circuit Court of Appeals level and the 11th Circuit rules one way on an issue, and the third or the fourth, wherever Pennsylvania, I always forget about where Pennsylvania is, they rule another way, and the Supreme Court splits 4-4. Well, then the Circuit Court of Appeals, their decision is now the law. Well, what if you have a different outcome?
Conflicting decisions, yeah.
That's one of the things why you really don't want to have an 8-member court in a closely decided election that could be a contested election.
Well, let's come back from the break. One of the articles we've posted here is how Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed. But if indeed she is, the justification is then this would give the Democrats a reason, they already wanted it and already were going to do it, to pack the court. Now, of course, we have the argument that Joe Biden wants to put a commission together. So we're going to talk about the courts. We'll talk about Amy Coney Barrett and a number of other things. Before we're done, though, I've got this very good piece. If Joe Biden were a Republican, as he was traveling around this next week, there are some questions they'd be asking, and they'd all start with the name Hunter Biden, I think. And so that would be something else we might want to get into as well. But let's come back and talk about the courts. We've got, of course, a lawyer here with First Liberty, and we'll talk about the confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett, the vote on Monday, what that might mean in the short term and long term, and will we eventually pack a court, and what that might mean, and whether or not that would affect judicial rulings and even the respect that the country has for the court. So we've got a lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back with the final hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and we're going to get into the whole issue of Amy Coney Barrett. Kind of got pushed off, but it will be front and center probably on Monday. But one of the articles we've posted, it is our third article, and it's by Molly Hemingway, who also co-authored with Kerry Severino, predicted that if Justice Ginsburg were to retire while Trump was still in the White House, the resulting appointment would probably be like the Thomas for Marshall trade. That's Clarence Thomas. Compared to what we might follow, the Kavanaugh confirmation might look like the good days of civility. But they said, clearly we were wrong. What about that?
Yeah.
It was not as controversial as many people thought it might be.
Well, they certainly back then couldn't have predicted a few things. One of them was COVID, which made it harder, I think, to disrupt the hearings with activists the way they did during the Kavanaugh hearings. And also the delay tactic. Any delay tactics that could have been used really didn't work because it was so close to the election, and there was just such a push by the Republicans, by Mitch McConnell, to get this done. And he really wasn't going to back off or back down. And also, Amy had a lot of admirers. She just, so many people came out, and I think they did a good job. And I think Kerry Severino's organization and others are, on they know how to get these people confirmed. They know what to get out there to the public so that they'll pressure their senators. So that was done. Then the media stories about Amy Coney Barrett, her kids, and all of that. Well, the bad ones about her kids, like the ones that said this was a colonialist to adopt children from Haiti, and she belongs to a cult, the People of Praise. None of that stuff really got traction. And, perhaps it was just because McConnell just moved it forward so quickly, there wasn't time. But also, I think there was, and this is their article, Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed because Kavanaugh battle taught the GOP to stop getting played by Democrat dirty tricks. The GOP, the Judiciary Committee, Republicans, everybody was on a mission to get this done, and nobody really let anything derail them or deviate them from it. And then Kerry Severino, so Molly Hemingway made those points. She also said, when the Democrats said they'd boycott the vote, the Republicans just said, fine, then she'll be unanimous. And so it's 12-0. She was confirmed in the Judiciary Committee. Kerry Severino said that people didn't really want anything that smacked of what happened so close to an election because that was so nasty and ugly, and it reflected badly on the Democrats. And the religion issue, they tried it when she was confirmed to the Seventh Circuit. It didn't work there, so they weren't going to be able to. It wasn't going to be very effective this time.
So again, some very good things. Well, this will change the complexion of the court, you think, but talk about how it will change, because I think most people understand in the broadest sense, but get into some of the specifics, what that might mean for you, even at First Liberty.
Well, I think it's good to have. We vet every judicial nominee, when they're announced for their record on the issue of religious liberty, because that's the only issue we litigate. And looking at her record, we were confident that she could be trusted to be an ardent defender of religious liberty. And Penna mentioned, the fiasco that she went through when she was confirmed to the Seventh Circuit with Feinstein. Questioning her Catholicism as if it was some sort of detriment. The dogma lives loudly within you, and that's a concern.
I think it's so funny because there's so many Catholics on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, there's now 6.
Yeah.
So I think Feinstein learned her lesson from that and knew better than to go there again. But so it's good to have somebody that we know, is another voice of reason when it comes to issues regarding religious liberty. I think that the fact that she faced, an assault on her faith herself, that personalizes it for you. Whether it was academic for you before, well, now it's real.
Yeah.
But having her on the court now, like the article mentioned, it's on par with getting Thomas for Marshall. you're getting Barrett for Ginsburg. Ginsburg was not only a very long-serving justice. She was probably the left's best, their best lawyer on the court. Like, she was the most persuasive for their viewpoint.
Apparently so. Yeah, many times. Brad Pinkel. And first of all, they almost always voted in lockstep. And when I say they, I'm also talking about Breyer and Sotomayor and Kagan.
Yeah.
And so you always knew you had those four, but the person that seemed to always keep them in line was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now,
when
who
I
is
say
that?
Right, exactly. When I say that she was, their most persuasive, when decisions came out that were 5-4, with Roberts coming along with the other four, or Roberts and Gorsuch on the Bostock opinion, when they meet and they discuss these cases, they're in there by themselves. And that's where they discuss the merits of the case. They've had an oral argument, they meet, they discuss it, they vote, and then they go start writing opinions. That I think is a big loss for the left wing of the court, because I think that's where Ginsburg was the most effective voice on the court for the left.
I think so. Agreed.
And so that is now gone. Now you have Barrett there, who is an admitted textualist and an originalist in the style of Scalia. She clerked for Scalia. And so it would be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out now that she's there. Thomas, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Alito. You have, in Thomas and Alito, you have two almost 100% reliable, conservative, little c, not political, but interpretation of the Constitution, votes. And if Barrett becomes a third, you only need one more in order to vote to take a case.
Right.
When they decide which cases to hear.
4 to take and 5 to win.
Exactly.
Right? We say so often.
It will be interesting to see if she joins sort of the Thomas Alito wing of the court in looking at cases and voting on which cases to take. Then they only have to really persuade either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch, and I think they're, for the most part, on that side of the issue.
Usually,
with a few surprises here and there. But that will really then put pressure on Roberts, because if there's a reliable 4 votes to take these kinds of cases, like to take, say, Joe Kennedy's case in order to get rid of employment division versus Smith, or other cases on other controversial issues, it could push Roberts a little bit to the right, because if he sees there's already 5 votes for this, I should go ahead and join this, because when the Chief Justice is in the majority opinion, he decides who writes the opinion.
Right. He
either writes it or he assigns it to somebody.
That is so important.
So, and he, from his mind, kind of seeing himself as the centrist or the moderate or whatever you want to call himself.
He's voting with the liberals on a couple of these cases now.
He's the new Kennedy is what he is.
Yes.
But he might join that majority in order to write that opinion himself, so that in his mind it doesn't go as far as, say, a Thomas would if Thomas is writing the opinion. Because if Roberts isn't in the majority, it's usually the senior justice in the majority writes the opinion, which would now be Thomas.
Yes, it would be.
And Thomas, I've heard him say this, talking about his friend Justice Scalia. He said, I used to tell him all the time, just think football. I'll set the edge and you run to the inside of me. It's my job to make you look like a moderate. So I hope that dynamic plays out and you see some more majority opinions written by Thomas.
Yep.
I'd be fine with that.
So on the Roberts issue, he's very concerned famously about the whole reputation of the court.
Yeah.
So if you've got more people that are going to be textualists and probably vote more conservatively on the cases, then doesn't he want the court to be more unified? And if his sensibilities go that direction anyway, which I'm not sure they do, but maybe they do. We used to think they did. Then maybe he'll join them because of that too, because of the reputation of the court. He likes to see more of a
I think that's a factor.
Unanimity with some of these cases. Yeah,
it could be, and that's why I say he might end up joining on some of those opinions, so that he gets to write the opinion, and in his mind writes it in a more centrist or moderate way that doesn't invite critique that he doesn't seem to like.
Good. Let's take a break, and let me just mention one of the other things we have posted is a video that is actually the two candidates for governor in Utah. And the one we've posted talks about a peaceful transition of power. This is just one of many, because there's another one where they actually say we're not going to say negative things about each other. And it's a classic example of, if you will, civility, something we've talked about. So first of all, if you haven't seen the video, 3 million people have, so you probably have. But if you haven't, that is the case. The one we have is on the peaceful transition of power. And that's another one, because they keep asking Donald Trump, if you lose, will there be a peaceful transition of power? So we're going to come back and talk about what happens if this election goes into overtime and some of these issues of election fraud that we might want to put on the table. We'll be right back.
This election, we've heard discussions of some radical far-left ideas on the campaign trail, but it was a real shock last week to hear a presidential candidate voice support for a right to gender transitions for 8-year-olds. At the ABC Town Hall in Philadelphia, the mother of a third grader who identifies as transgender asked candidate Joe Biden how he, if elected president, would protect the rights of people who claim a different gender under U.S. law. Vice President Biden answered, "I will flat out just change the law. Eliminate those executive orders, number one." Then he went on to describe the scenario where, quote, an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I want to be transgender. Of the life-altering decision for a child to begin a gender transition, Mr. Biden said to this mother, "There is no reason to suggest that there be any right denied your daughter. Parents, doctors, and good government are God-given protectors to help children follow the best, most healthy paths in life. For no child does that path lead toward offering a gender change." But Joe Biden implied that children have the right to pursue gender transition, and to deny this is discrimination. Mind you, we don't have any federal laws that ban gender transition procedures for minors, but some states do, and others are working on passing such legislation. This is exactly the right and wise thing to do for several reasons. First, studies have shown that most children with gender confusion outgrow it by puberty. To step in with drugs that block puberty is not only unwise but medically harmful. The pressure escalates then for more serious interventions. The next step in the transition process is to administer cross-sex hormones. And the third, radical but increasingly common step is gender reassignment surgery. To set a child on this path is wrong. The American College of Pediatricians calls it child abuse. It's now a campaign issue. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the articles we posted there is a video that you can watch, and it's about the idea of the peaceful transition of power. And this is two candidates for the governorship in Utah. First of all, saying they're not going to be negative toward each other, and second of all, they're going to accept the presidential results. And of course, this is a question being asked of Donald Trump, because the assumption being made so far by all the pollsters is that Joe Biden is ahead, Joe Biden's going to win, and also now you're having Charlie Cook suggest that it's a piece theoretically possible that indeed Donald Trump could win, but if he does, doesn't matter because the Democrats are going to hold the House. I think most people agree with that. And the Democrats will win the Senate. And then you think about, gridlock with a capital G, I guess so. But there are a few people that are saying, whoa, hold it, and I mentioned the other day Robert Cahaly, who's with Trafalgar, and they were very successful last time in predicting Trump winning places like Michigan and Wisconsin. Also very accurate in predicting Ron DeSantis winning in Florida because he uses an entirely different kind of polling. And some of this has to do with what are called the shy Trump voters. How many of them are out there? Because these are individuals who maybe don't exist according to the official polling organizations, but other people say, yeah, they're out there, and they're the ones that when the phone rings, they don't answer it. But even if indeed they do respond to a pollster, they may not be forthcoming. And you look at the latest Cato Institute poll, which found that the reluctance of conservatives to share their political views with another individual has increased from 70% to 77%. And I think we know why. So this is going to be very interesting because either the one pollster who actually has Trump ahead is wrong, or all of these pollsters who were wrong last time are wrong. And Lathan, what about that? Because in some respects, the assumption is that either Donald Trump or Joe Biden on the night of November 3rd will not concede the election. What about this?
Yeah, Frank Luntz, who does a lot of focus groups and polling and that sort of thing, kind of made a name for himself. I heard him say earlier this week that if the pollsters get it all wrong like they did last time, then polling as an industry is almost over. And
yeah, I think you're right.
And honestly, I think that would actually be good for the country. I mean, because polling in the campaign becomes a way to influence. The polling is not really done in order to tell you how the race is going. It's done to try to tell you your guy's going to lose. Either way.
Don't show up.
And it's right, and it's trying to influence the election. So, I mean, as far as the peaceful transition of power, this is a really just ludicrous question in my humble opinion. And particularly,
but it gets asked all the time.
I know, and particularly, ironic is the left trying to make an issue of it with on whether or not President Trump will accept the results of the election when they clearly did not accept the results of the 2016 election. They've spent the last 4 years trying to undo that in what amounts to almost an organized coup at high levels of the Justice Department and elsewhere, impeaching the president and all this other stuff. If it's a close election, and I think the popular vote will be close, but my hope is that even though it's close, it breaks one way or another, and that's kind of my only prediction, is that it's going to break to one side or the other. And you say, well, that's a safe assumption. It's got to break one. No, what I mean is,
it's going to be something like a landslide.
I think it's
so
going to be.
You don't think we're going to be counting for weeks?
Let's hope not.
Well, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, I think it will still be close in the popular vote, but I think the winner, it's going to be a wave election. I just don't know if it's going to be a red wave or a blue wave.
Mm-hmm.
I think states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, all these places, I think the vote will be close, but I think the person that wins one of those is probably winning all of those. And that might actually, even if it's close, I think that might actually stop it from being drug out 2-3 weeks contested, because if you
get
look
290 to 300 electoral votes, and
it's clear,
done.
and it's a big win. Even if those states were very close, the other guy looks and goes, well, I'd have to flip all of these via litigation, and that not likely to happen. So let's concede the election.
Move on.
Now, I could be totally wrong. First time for everything. That's for my wife, who might be listening. Where it does split fairly evenly, where maybe it is a very, very close in the electoral college, and then it is a much more tense
at Ohio,
situation.
Florida, Michigan, something like that. Yeah,
Bush v. Gore all over again. And you go,
here we go.
Yeah, exactly. I hope that's not the case.
So in the scenario where it goes, we either have a blue wave or a red wave, Does that speak for the Senate that probably the Senate will go the way the presidency goes?
If it's a wave election, yes, I think so. I mean, the numbers did not stack up well for the GOP to begin with. There were 33 seats up, and I think the GOP is defending 23 of them, if my math is right. And they only have a 3-seat majority, so the Ds only have to do a +4 in the Senate in order to take the Senate.
And they probably take Arizona. Maybe they take Maine. Republicans pick up Alabama, and then you start getting
and maybe
down
Michigan.
Michigan now. Then you start looking at Montana, Iowa, North Carolina. And and you tell me who wins some of those, and I'll tell you who the next who controls the Senate, and maybe even tell you who the next president is too.
You know, the statement that you made, Lathan, about the polls and how they sometimes can actually be persuasive. It reminds me of the first time I heard Donald Trump speak in person. Actually, really the only time I've ever seen him speak in person was during the primaries for the presidency, and it was in the end of 2015. And he came and spoke to a group that I was in, and he was my last choice of all the Republicans. And he talked about his polls the whole time. He basically hardly talked about issues. He talked about his polls, and I couldn't understand that strategy at all. But he ended up getting the nomination. He ended up being ahead in that primary most of the time. For months and months, he stayed ahead. And I've changed my mind now that sometimes the polls are persuasive because you have other factors and influences at play, but when you see a winner and you see someone that's for all that long time continues to fight and then comes out on top, and then you saw all these people that I know that are very conservative that were just going over to Trump. They're leaving. Ted Cruz was there at the end, but it's crazy. But that is a motivator to see a winner, to see someone who can actually last. So I think that's very true.
Well, if nothing else, we are talking about, of course, not only a presidential election, but as you said, these senatorial elections as well. And so I might just say to our listeners, every one of your votes matter. But if you're living right now in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you may actually determine who the president is. And as I just said a few minutes ago, if you're living in North Carolina, Iowa, Montana, maybe even Arizona, Maine, you might determine whether or not the Republicans control the Senate. And if Republicans control the Senate, that's a little better for the kind of nominees you want to get on the courts, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the number one most impacting, if that or impactful
sure.
Accomplishment of the first term for President Trump or the judges as he put on the court.
Again, if you want to know more about First Liberty, that is on our website. Penna, I'm sorry we didn't mention your piece today, but her Viewpoints commentary, Childhood Gender Politics, which is just another one of those incredible stories that you have covered. And so all of that is available at our website. If you'd like to know more about all these topics that we've addressed, we have a lot of articles out there, and I would encourage you to read them and pass them on to other individuals. But we need to have a weekend, and I'm looking forward to it. So I want to thank Doug for his help as the engineer and for Steve as the producer. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.